There
Oh,
we go.
wow. I
Nice.
really announced that.
All right. So, first question is, who are you and what is your position in the state of Connecticut?
My name is Sean Scanlon, and I'm the state comptroller of Connecticut.
That's fun. So, the majority of students have no clue what a comptroller is. So, what does the role entail? What does it mean?
The majority of people don't know what it is, so
Yeah,
don't feel
exactly.
bad that just students don't. But essentially, I'm the chief financial officer of the state. So I pay the state's bills, I pay the state's employees, we audit the books, we do all of the benefit procurement and disbursement to people. I run the largest healthcare plan in the state of Connecticut. We run a retirement plan for small businesses. So there's a ton of stuff that we do. But in the simplest sense, I'm the CFO of the state.
Nice. That's awesome. All right. So Martha, you can ask the next one.
Yeah, I'll ask the next one. What are the most important values to you when deciding what programs or acts to back?
Well, I think the most important values for me are just, does it help people, right? I mean, I ran for office at a very young age. I'm the youngest person to ever have this job because I wanted to help people, first in my hometown where I ran for state rep, and then broadly across the whole state in this gig. And so I guess you could kind of say that my North Star is always just, do I think that this is going to help people? Is this good for our state? And if it is, then I decide to throw my support behind it.
So, you've recently released a report regarding the challenges facing rideshare drivers. Could you expand on what your recommendations mean for the industry or for the state?
Yeah, so when I was first elected to the General Assembly, I was the youngest member of the General Assembly, and Uber and Lyft were just starting out. And most of my colleagues had no idea what it was, had never taken one, had certainly never been a driver for one. And I went undercover to become a driver to prove how bad the things like background checks were, and because there was no regulations for Uber. So I actually wrote the first ever law regulating Uber in 2017. And so fast forward a few years to today, most states have done that, but now states are doing secondary regulatory efforts for these companies. And that's mostly because the central premise of Uber and Lyft is that they don't treat their drivers as employees in the way that you'd be an employee if you worked at a grocery store or a tech company. And so, what myself and other people are trying to do now is to say, okay, we're not going to tell you that you have to treat these people as employees because they've won court cases that says that they can't do that. But we are going to ask that you treat these workers better than you're treating them now and give them some benefits that would be basic things like a minimum wage, healthcare, access to things like paid family leave. So we did this big audit, as many of the people in my position have done, to show the cost of what it is that they don't treat them as employees in terms of revenue to the state, but then also suggested that we do what Massachusetts and New York and other states have done to actually give some of these folks the benefits that I think that they deserve for working, even though they may not have the title of employee.
Now, what other legislations have you recently proposed or backed?
Well, I feel like I'm at the state capitol like all the time because I'm constantly either proposing something or responding to something. But a couple other quick ones would be number one, my office does a lot of investigations recently that the governor has asked us to do. One of them had to do with Terrence Chang, who's the head of the CSCU, public college, state college university system. So trying to get their finances in order. Another one had to do with the Social Equity Council, which is the government entity that basically regulates cannabis and the sale of cannabis and the production of cannabis. There were some issues with some shady stuff that they were doing that we uncovered in an audit, and now we're trying to pass legislation that would sort of put more financial guardrails on that council. So, whether it's those things or the Uber and Lyft, or I'm trying to get a bill passed right now that would prevent wage theft among construction trades. So men and women that get up and go to work every day and do these works for the state that if their boss is shortchanging them some money, I want to stop the payment of that project until they treat their workers with respect. So it's a bunch of stuff, but I love this job, and even though I am no longer a legislator, I'm doing a lot of stuff in the legislature this year.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right. What's next? A lot of questions. So what path did you take to get to where you are today? So this could be college, past government positions, as you mentioned.
Well, I worked at Subway in Guilford, where I was from in high school, and it sucked. And I was doing it to save money for college and to help, out with my mom, who was raising me mostly as a single parent. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, but then I did a book report for a history class on Bobby Kennedy Sr., and was totally blown away by him and the idea that you could help people. And there was this job that you got to go to work every day and try to solve problems and give voice to voiceless people and to give attention to issues that are not being really given attention to in mainstream politics. And so I just became obsessed with politics, and was about your age when I first started getting into it. From there, I just started interning and working with people. And then after I got out of college, I spent a year working in Manhattan doing something that I thought I was going to do with my life, but then hated that. And then started working for Chris Murphy, who at the time was just a young member of Congress. And I worked with Chris for 10 years. And then somewhere in the middle of that, I ran for a state rep from my hometown. And then in 2022, I ran for this job. But as corny as it sounds, it literally all started with a book report when I was in high school.
That's awesome. Wow. All right. Um, does anybody else want to ask this next question?
I can ask it.
All right.
Mr. Scanlon, what have been the largest challenges you faced as Comptroller of Connecticut?
Explaining what I do. But I think the biggest challenge that I gave myself was to try to make what I do relevant to people, and to try to make the wonky stuff that I do uh, understandable to people. Just because I think that when people understand what their government is up to or what government is doing, that's a generally good thing. And I also think that there has been intentional campaign in the last few years and decade to destroy government and to make people believe that government actually is not good and can't solve problems. And I feel like if I break down for people what I do and make it accessible to them, and it's not just a bunch of like big sounding numbers and putting people to sleep, if it's actually accessible to them, then they're going to be more interested in it. So that's one challenge I give myself. But the other challenge is, um, I love the state. I have two little kids, and I want them to have a better state than the one that I inherited. And that means I think we have to get our fiscal house in order, which is what we've largely been doing for the last decade. But now I think we have to figure out how to make Connecticut more affordable. So for the cost of healthcare, housing, energy, college, all these things that are expensive for people right now, I think we have to make them more affordable. And if we can do that, I think that we will be in a much better place. So I'd say those are two of the many challenges I face, but two that are kind of top of mind for me all the time.
Wow. And building on top of that, has there been any like major setbacks in your career, like not just as comptroller, but maybe like your like path to get to where you are like now, and how have you like overcome them?
Yeah, totally. I mean, all of us face setbacks every day in our life, whether you're a politician or you're a student or you're just a normal person going about your day. Politics in particular is a business that is very frustrating, and the pace of change is sometimes pretty slow. And politics, in a lot of ways, is terrible in the sense that it's people calling each other names and tweeting insane things at them and making, crazy threats and all these things, right? But I put up with the bullshit aspects of politics because I really believe that we can solve problems and fix things and make them better. And I think that a lot of people, especially young people, um, are turned off by politics because they look at government and they don't see government necessarily solving the problems that they think are existentially important, be it climate change or civil rights or anything, you name it, right? And they say, "No, man, I'm not going to waste my time with that. Like that's just a bunch of noise and distraction. They don't do anything." So I was the person in high school that was trying to convince my friends to give a shit about politics, and it's not easy. It's not easy for a lot of different reasons. But the important work that people do in politics is super important. It's not for everybody, but it's important that somebody's doing it. And the biggest thing I would say to people is that um, you just there will be so many setbacks in your experience in politics should you all choose to pursue this either as a profession or to pursue it as a citizen, which you should do. But it's always going to be worth keeping up that fight. And if you don't do it, then somebody else who perhaps has worse intentions than you will be doing it.
Thank you. Okay. All right, this one's a little, it's a fun one, so it's a
I'm
nice
all for fun
icebreaker.
ones.
So, what is your favorite thing about being a comptroller?
I said this the other day, actually, to a group of students who asked me this question. I would say one of my favorite things is that people call me back. So I'm in a position where I can pretty much call anybody in the state, and my phone call is going to get answered just because people think that I'm a bigger deal than I really am. And that gives me a little bit of leverage to get things done that I want to get done. And I think that the ability to kind of call anybody is a cool thing, just as a curious person, right? To be able to learn something or to talk to somebody new. And I like that aspect of it. But a more serious answer is honestly just I get to go to work every day and try to solve problems. And I love to do that. I'm very fulfilled by it. I have a lot of friends that make a lot more money than I do and live very different lives than I do. But I have this quench to solve problems, and I really like to do it, even though it doesn't pay the big bucks.
Awesome. Okay. So, on the same kind of page here, what is your favorite thing about living in Connecticut?
Well, I live in Guilford, and Guilford is on the water, though I don't live on the water.
Lucky.
And I love Long Island Sound. I love there's a road in Guilford and half of Brantford called 146. It's a state road that drives along the coast. I think it's a 13-mile road. And whenever I need to clear my head or I need to think about something or whenever I, you know, back in the day was trying to impress girls on dates, I would take them on a drive on this beautiful road. And it always reminds me of everything I love about Connecticut. But besides just that, right? I mean, like we have amazing schools, we have cool culture, we have a very diverse state in the sense that like you can be on the coast down here and then you can be up in beautiful Litchfield County and take a hike, or you can go to sort of like the quiet corner and be part of, a very different experience than you are in different parts of the state. And I just think the state is a small but awesome state.
Nice. And then Oscar, did you want to ask the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you could give one piece of advice to a high school student, what would you tell them?
Get involved, be engaged. Doesn't mean you have to run for office, but be engaged as a citizen, and don't be discouraged by failure in politics. Because if you look back in the history, as I'm sure many of you are into history, right? The greatest leaders in the history of our world all faced incredible failure in their life. And you look at someone like Dr. King, who spent years and years and years trying to get done what it is that he got done. If he, at any step of that process, just said, screw it, I'm going to walk away from this, right? We may not have the country we have today. Abraham Lincoln, I think, lost every election that he ever ran in. Like he lost like 5 or 6 elections until he was finally elected to the state legislature in Illinois. And if he walked away and said, screw it, like this isn't for me, our country looks dramatically different. And so I think what I would say is my best advice is there will be big setbacks. It is annoying and frustrating and emotionally draining, especially lately, but it's worth it to stay engaged. And you never know who you may wind up in our country's history if you keep on going with the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to ask the next question. Mr. Scanlon, you recently backed a bill that would ensure coverage for mental health. Why is accessibility to mental health services significant to you?
Well, first of all, I think mental health and all healthcare is a human right. I think everybody should have access to it. Mental health is personally important to me, and this issue is personally important to me just because I fundamentally just think that it's important to get mental health care, and to, be embracing of the fact that mental health is just as important to me as physical health, right? And that's super stigmatized in our country and our society, even though we're making progress. But there's no different in my mind between getting my mind right and getting my body right. And insurance companies should not look at either of those things differently. Unfortunately, they do. I passed a law in 2019 to ban them from doing it, and they've found ways around it. So we're going to pass another law to make sure that they don't find ways around that. And I think as a result, you will see people get the help and treatment that they deserve that they're not getting right now.
I truly agree with that. And going back to kind of things that like motivate you, how have your parents' occupations as a police officer and a small business owner influenced your focuses while serving the people of Connecticut?
Well, my dad died when I was basically your age, and he was no longer a police officer, but he struggled mightily with mental health and substance use. He was an alcoholic who was in long-term recovery, and I never saw him drink alcohol, but he didn't ever get the help that he should have gotten to process a lot of the stuff that he was involved in as a police officer, and before that in the Marine Corps during Vietnam. And so I saw firsthand his problems with it. And then my mom, when my parents got divorced when I was 6 and my dad moved back to New York, where he was from, my mom almost never had health insurance, and often struggled with being able to afford healthcare or to even get healthcare. And when I was growing up, I thought that was really a problem that affected just her. And then I realized it affected a lot of people. So, for me, seeing both of my parents struggle in different ways with healthcare was one of the main reasons why I decided to run for office in the first place. But it's why I've dedicated a big part of my career to the field of healthcare, and specifically trying to make it better because I saw what it meant for them and have experienced that firsthand.
Thank you. That was inspirational. Wow. Okay. So next question. I think this might be the last formal question we have. Um,
I'm ready for the informal ones.
yeah. So, how has your family, especially your children and your wife, motivated decisions you've made throughout your career?
Well, my wife and I have known each other for a really long time, and we met working in Chris Murphy's office. And she works right now in domestic violence prevention. And she is, my best friend and somebody who is constantly engaging with me and the work that I do, and I'm engaging with the work that she does. And if she doesn't feel like I'm fighting hard enough for stuff, she's the first person to tell me that she thinks I suck at what I'm doing and need to step up my game a little bit. So I guess that's that. And look, kids changed my life. Being a parent is super hard, and it's a lot, but it's incredibly rewarding. And I feel like in many ways, have such a different outlook on politics and the work that I do since I became a dad, which is kind of crazy because I was very passionate about the work that I did before I had kids, but it's in a different light now that I have kids. I am just maybe a little bit more compassionate, maybe a little bit more emotional, and in some ways things like touch me differently than I think that they did before I had kids. And I think that that makes me a better elected official, to be honest. So both of them are big motivating factors for me.
Thank you. So does anyone have any like, you know, on the spot questions? 'Cause I know I have one. It's kind of off topic, but I thought it was interesting.
You go
If you
ahead.
haven't already been able to tell this, I'm a pretty open book and I'll answer any of your questions if you have them. So we got like 5 minutes left here. Fire away if you want to ask a question.
All right, here I'm gonna ask one. What are your favorite sports teams?
So my dad was from the Bronx.
Okay.
And so I was indoctrinated early on as a New York sports fan. So huge Yankee fan. I'm a very big Ranger fan, New York Rangers. And my son, my older son, is obsessed with hockey. So we watch just about every Rangers game together. And then, unfortunately, I'm a long-suffering New York Jets fan. And then, as you can tell, I'm a big UConn Husky basketball fan. So those are my four sports teams.
I feel you. I every year it's terrible with the Giants though. So, it's kind of Giants and Jets, they kind of go together. They're both
That's
terrible.
true. That's true.
All right.
But
Any Alice?
I didn't really have a question. I just want to say, yeah, thank you so much for meeting with us. If nobody else has any other questions, especially what you said about like mental health and like your like path to becoming comptroller, like growing up, I find it really inspirational. And quite frankly, I think that you deserve more recognition for what you do than what you do get.
I agree. I'm astonished. Like whenever I told the group originally that we wanted to interview you, they were like, "What's a comptroller?" So, but it's great that now we all know and now we know more about you.
I appreciate you saying that, Allison. And you know, it's a job that I'm trying to transform, right? There's probably an expectation in people's minds of what a comptroller is, right? I'm the 67th person in history to do this job, and I am quite different than all the other 67 or 66, I guess. But I think that it's important, to just try to get to know people and what they do in government. And I think the project that you all are doing is pretty cool and interviewing people, and I'm glad to do it. Anybody else have a question before we jump off?
I have a quick question. Sorry.
No,
Um,
go ahead.
I was gonna talk going back to your experiences. I was gonna ask that how do you think your personal experiences contributed to like the political atmosphere of Connecticut and like the work you do and and just how you embody that work?
Like, how do I think my experiences impact the work I do right now?
Yes.
So, I think they impact it all the time. And I think the things that I used to be upset about when I was younger are now my strength today. So, like I said, my parents split up when I was a kid. My mom was in and out of a lot of different relationships after that. We moved all the time. My mom, had a lot of financial problems. I didn't always have the best relationship with my dad, and then my dad died. And all these things I used to be embarrassed by, or frustrated by, or angry about. And in some ways, I think that they've helped me out tremendously because I had a dad who was a cop and a Marine. I had one stepdad that was big into football. I had a different stepdad that was a musician. I had boyfriends and my mom that taught me how to do all these different things. And as a result of that, I feel very comfortable in a lot of different settings. And that is like a politician's superpower. Because if you're a person who has one experience and only one experience, let's say that you grew up very wealthy, and that's what you know, and you were a rich kid and you went to an Ivy League school, and then you come into politics, you just know that one thing. Whereas I know all these different things. And I just feel like what might have been a bad thing when I was younger actually turned out to be a good thing for me now that I have this job and am in politics. And the jury's still out, obviously, on what that will mean long term, but I'm enjoying it.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think, your transparency and comfortability with like these topics is really important to connecting and resonating with the audience, especially the youth that might not want to connect. But I really think that's important. So yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
I have a question. What's the hardest thing about being a comptroller, like personally?
Um, there's a couple of different answers I could give. I mean, one of them is just that, like, I really, really want to get stuff done. And sometimes there are limitations to what I can personally do. You know, I used to have a very powerful job in the legislature. I was the chair of the budget committee, and I had a lot of power, but no profile. I ran for a job that doesn't have a ton of power, but it has a lot of profile. And the reason I did that was because I thought that I could trade on this profile that I have to draw more attention to the things that I wanted to do more than I could as just a state rep in the state capitol. And 2 years into it, I think that that actually is true and somewhat working. Maddie, who's on this call right now, is my communications director. It's her job to help tell the story of what we do in the world. And I get a lot more media attention in this job than I did in my previous job. And I try to use that attention to sort of tell stories about what I think is important. And so, in some ways, my frustration, I guess, would be that I don't have the direct ability to always help solve the problem that I want to solve. And that can be sometimes pretty frustrating.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I think I don't want the time to run out without us all saying, goodbye and thank you. Just because I don't know, they put a 40-minute limit now for free. So
Yeah, it's in my premium in order to have a longer
Well,
meeting.
you're welcome, and thank you guys for what you're doing. Again, I was once in your shoes. You may think it's a long time ago, but in my mind, it's not that long ago. And I'm just proud of what you're doing because you're engaged in something that's really worth it. And I hope that you all continue to engage in this. And if I can ever help you along the way in this, or you have other questions, email me just like Evan did, right? And I will respond to you because I'm trying to pay it forward to people that helped me when I was your age and gave me the attention that is not always common for people to give young people in politics. So thanks for what you do. Thanks for having me on. And I hope you all stick with it. It's worth it.
absolutely. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
for
much
Yeah.
for
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you. Bye
you.
bye.